everyone. I'm Janet Nelson of the Creative Mind Podcast. We're going to be talking about how this podcast began and what it's about. The creative mind. This is the story of these podcasts. Now, in the future, we'll be interviewing creative people as they tell their story and explain the way they process information. The Creative Mind Podcast is created for those people that aren't special needs, but they don't do well in a regular classroom either. In the past, they've basically muddled through. On the Nez Perce Reservation, I talked to a wonderful teacher who's retired, and she said of the Native Americans, we got them through. It was not a positive experience going through school, because school overall is high verbal and very sequential, and most of them aren't. And so it's those people that just don't fit within our present system. The educational community is addressing the issue at this point, and you'll hear more about that later. Here's our story. 18 years ago, we were able to take into our home a wonderful baby boy. I have 3 older children that we had homeschooled all the way through the years of schooling, through 12th grade. And then they went on and they got all 3 of them got BAs, 2 of them went on to get MAs, doing really well in life, giving me grandchildren. I'm super proud of them. So when we adopted this young boy, we knew that we were going to probably homeschool. And because it's 19 years between my older 3 and him, we didn't want him to be isolated. And so we put him in a home school program. It was a wonderful program. Love the people, love the teachers. But somehow he got lost in, even though many of the classes weren't large, he just got lost. And but I was doing most of the teaching, and he knows how to spell, he knows how to read, he knew how to do basic math. I mean, the skills were being taught, and he was learning. But in 4th grade, at the end of the year, he took the standardized test like all the students do that are in school, and the scores were not good. And we're going, okay, what happened? And so I went about figuring out what's going on and how he learns. I couldn't find it anywhere online. There's nothing that was saying anything about this. Okay, so what are you doing? I knew in 6th grade that instead of doing the questions at the end of the history lesson, if he would go ahead and do his own drawings and observations or question and answers, he would think it through, and he would get A's on the tests I gave him. If I handed him those questions that at the end of the chapter, that did nothing. He did not understand. He did not get the material. I tried being kinetic, getting him involved in all kinds of different projects. I tried a number of different things. Nothing worked except him processing through it his way by himself. So I said, okay, we understand that. He went into 7th grade. In 7th grade, the teachers in this program actually give the assignments and grade the papers or grade the projects. And so we were all in this process of figuring out how he learns, and they're going, why does he do this, can do this, but can't do that? And so we had him tested at the public school. And it said that he was a sensory learner with a process weakness. They didn't explain that. What I learned later on was that the education community was just figuring out what a sensory learner is, how they process information. They really didn't know at the time that my son was in 7th grade. A process weakness, there's many different kinds of process weaknesses. So which one was Matthias? So I was still in the midst of, okay, what does this look like? What does it sound like? How do we teach our son? Teach this young man, okay? Teach my son. And so, but it was really interesting that when I was talking about this with my friends and different people that think like him came out of the woodwork, it looked like. They were my neighbors, they were at church, they were, you name it, they were everywhere. I was sitting at the homeschool with all the mothers and everyone as we were going to talk to teachers, right? At parents' night. And they would think like him as well, or have parts of it that they were thinking. His art teacher thinks like Matthias does. So it was like, okay. So I was learning and just grabbing everything I could do. I am them think things through. So I'm using all my skills to figure this thing out. So a lot of the ladies that you'll hear on the Creative Mind are part of that process as I was figuring them out. By the time he went into 9th grade, the teachers absolutely thought they knew how to teach him, and they were using visuals to do so. Problem. They did not understand the process weakness, and it ended up a mess, and Matthias folded in on himself. I still love the teachers. They're wonderful people. They just didn't know how. They hadn't been trained how to teach somebody like Matthias. And so we ended up homeschooling him because I didn't know where to put him. I met a lady that does photo shoots for seniors. She put her kids in one of those project schools. But at the time, I would have not known what the questions were to ask because truthfully, he's not kinetic. One time he was making a clay model of a Roman building, and he loved working with the clay and doing all that, but making it part of history and knowing about Rome, his brain did not make those connections. So he loved the clay, enjoyed that thoroughly, but kinetic is not the way to teach him. So I'm going, okay, what do we do? So I'd have to ask that question if we were doing it at a project place. Some of them are do a lot of projects. Some of them are more hands-on sensory types of things. Some of them are more experience-based. You just have to ask the questions. But I did not know that at the time. And my experience was in homeschooling. So I went, let's just do it because I know him and I know I can do it. And at this point, he needed not to fail again. So here we go. So, but the curriculum, online curriculum anywhere, yeah, finding curriculum, particularly for history and literature, was not there. Once we got through world literature, there was one came up that was story-based that might work, but I haven't really looked at it. It just came up on Amazon. And so they're working at it. But the time I was going through, there wasn't anything. So it's basically Holy Spirit, because I'm a Christian, how do I do this? And just going step by step, figuring out how to teach him there's a lot of literature that is not sequentially based, that you can have a lot of fun with, that they enjoy, that makes sense to their brains. You don't have to use these things that they don't understand. So we did that. I learned a lot more about how he thinks and how to work with him. During those 2 years, we used summers to catch him up. And then as a senior, he really wanted to graduate from public school. All of his friends had, that's what he wanted to do. And so they had us go into a special program, but to get in and get credit, he had to take the GED first. And he was willing to do that. The GED is a sequential test. There's questions and you pull the answers from paragraphs, kind of things. That's sequential in nature. And so, yeah, their brains don't do that well. He did it. He got through it. He passed. Super proud of him. They do add pictures now to that, which is really awesome. And that really helped. And then he was able to go into this new program that is in Spokane, and it is individualized learning for kids that don't fit in the regular classroom. Matthias, right? And he ended up in a class, well, an elective, because as senior year, he needed some electives. And so he went into this class and immediately the teacher had him do Photoshop. And he sat down and Photoshop absolutely made sense to him. And he started putting together a poster about Seattle, the Space Needle, that kind of thing, things that we are notably about Seattle. And when the teacher came back and he just went, you did this. Matthias going, yeah, but Matthias wasn't satisfied because he didn't know how to cut and paste super well. So there was some details that he didn't like. But at the same time, that told the teacher volumes about my son. And Matthias loves Photoshop. And he just went at it. The teachers were wonderful. He's done advertising for the school, for different events. He just got in and had a great time doing art. He found his niche. The teacher really encouraged him to go into graphic design. It is a specialty program at our community college. And what we didn't know then is that you do have to have an interview before you go into it. And so that will be taking place hopefully this December. So he's doing well, but it's been quite the journey. So, but the ladies, and I work with mostly ladies because, I do coaching, and my brain and their brain works best together. But I've talked to men as well that will think like this. It's everywhere. And so going forward, I'm hoping to have more people on than just the people that I know immediately that fit in this category. And if you do, I'd love to hear from you and I'd love to interview you. So the creative mind, this is how it works. It can feel overwhelming and can lead them to procrastinating. The reason is they take old information and new information and it can clash in their heads. At that point, that is that feeling of overwhelm. What? So you have this log jam in your brain. If they step back and take 5 or 10 minutes to think about something completely different, they can come back and they can see a complete log cabin out of those logs. They don't know how it got there. They can't tell you the details. Can't put the links together to tell you the process. They don't know. It's just built. They see it. The log cabin, they see the big picture. Then they can go back and go, okay, now the foundation needs to have this, and then you put the logs this way to make the cabin, and you have to have a roof, and you have to have a chimney. They can put the details in, but they've got to see the whole picture first. Ruth is a painter. What she can at times see the entire painting that she wants to paint completely done, and then go back and go, okay, what's the first color on my canvas? What's the next layer? What's the next layer? What's the next layer? She can do that all in her head. Cindy, the lady that figured this all out and told me about it, worked for FEMA. She led a 57-person team, including the military, after Katrina in New Orleans. She had a lot of information, and she needed to figure out how they could work together to meet the needs of the people. She went on a walk on the beach and prayed, letting her mind have that break. When she came back, she saw the big picture and was able to execute it. The lady that came in after her couldn't figure it out. And they asked her to come back, but because of other commitments, she could not. On the other hand, Shirley and I were talking about the Tolkien trilogy when she asked, I need the beginning and the end. I don't need all that stuff in between. Is that me doing big picture thinking? Well, of course, my answer is yes. But it says how difficult for them to explain themselves and even figure out how to work effectively with themselves. Health, non-sequential, talking about big picture, but they also see the very small stuff. When you're non-sequential, that means, I was showing you those links. My brain links this idea with this idea to this idea to this idea to this idea. Theirs don't do that. And so those questions at the end of the chapter don't make sense because they're not linking those pieces together. And it makes it really tough to just take directions from a teacher or a mom or a boss, because they're hearing words, but they're not connecting the pieces easily. And so just figuring out directions can be complicated if they are in word form. I love Legos because they always put pictures right beside those words, and Matthias could figure out all the different things and put them together to make planes or whatever it was because of the pictures. It even makes things more difficult when most questions on tests are about the in-between stuff that Shirley was talking about and are written by sequential people. One question Matthias ran into when he was taking his driving test was, what two things are most important on this list? Well, he knew the list. That's not a problem. But he picked the two that made sense to him that would be most important. Of course, the sequential person who wrote the test meant the two first ones. But in his brain, if they're on the list, they're all important. In coaching, my friend Mary will come up with a dream from God and what she received from her morning of studying the Bible, knowing they're connected, but telling me she's really going to have to pray about it to figure it out. I give a thought of how they're connected, and she's super excited. The riddle has been solved, and it makes sense to her. It isn't this middle ground of thinking that they have when they have ideas but they aren't connecting, that they struggle. Another sequential issue that they have is with time. My friends work hard at being on time to things, whether it's a doctor appointment or a coaching appointment. They're working hard, whether it's putting it on their phone, putting it on their refrigerator, on their chalkboard, any way to remind themselves to be on time. But it's a struggle. On the Nez Perce reservation, the police used to get really bugged when the tribe would set up a time to have a parade. It'd be like 10 o'clock in the morning, but they wouldn't actually start until 1 o'clock. Non-sequential people, when given a choice, flow with time rather than controlling it through scheduling. Now, amazingly enough, as big picture as many of them are, they are very, very detailed. Besides was drawing a picture for our friends that had lost her mother. And when we came into a problem, what do ashes look like? Shirley's take on that, well, yeah, what do ashes look like? Because it kept looking like pebbles when he drew them. So Shirley's take on it is that pebbles are round and ashes are flat. Well, Ruth's take on that same thing is, well, ashes change shape according to what is burned. They are very detailed. Saying Shirley and I were talking about Jesus being the rock. She was struggling. So the first rock she experienced in her mind was rough and with sharp edges and was very small. She was concerned that she'd fall off of it. It became bigger as we talked. But it still felt like she could fall off of it. The following time we coached, she said she knew that wasn't God's rock. The rock she has since experienced is a plateau that is smooth on the sides, flat on top, and really high. I asked her what it felt like for her feet to be on that rock. Her response, secure. It's not going to move, was her answer. Another lady saw Psalms 133. The oil dripping down the priest's robes. It felt smooth and soft, like oiled does. But what really struck her was how messy it was. The psalm is about unity, and that connection was a surprising awareness for her. Unity can be truly messy. Scenes are visual, but also include other senses as well, and usually have an emotion. They are an experience in themselves. This type of inherent thinking makes experience of high value for these people. Of course, they love pictures. Okay. Of course, they love any kind of pictures because their brain will pick it up. They may end up using a different one, but this will get them started, or it can actually ground a lecture or a lot of words that are put together. Just having that picture can ground the whole thing. What they often do is their minds will come up with a picture, but it doesn't have the details. Like that log cabin didn't have a path going to it or shrubbery around it. They will add the details as the talk continues. Analogies. Matthias can easily come up with 5 visual analogies while talking about one idea. He just must pick out the best one before exploring the idea further. Analogies have become part of the international coaching community because they are so powerful for most people. This one on the slide is him struggling with negative thoughts about getting something done, like doing a history project. The thoughts are like jello or a hologram. If he just walks through them, he can get the project done and feel good about himself. Another thing that often isn't talked about is associations. We see them everywhere in society. My son is into sports, particularly football, where a phrase or a symbol can take on a life of its own. LeBron James is known as the king. So Matthias put a picture of one and a line together to make a poster. Other ways to use associations, for example, like ectodermic becomes a glass of ice cold Coke before becoming a cold-blooded animal. The three-finger eye monkey becomes association that Sherry at one time needed to remember the bones and ligaments of the human hand. The conch shell becomes association that Heather needed. She used that in high school to remember the parts of the human ear. Memory. Memory can be tricky. Matthias once said that what he does to remember 5 words is place them around a room, like this picture: cup, keys, car, bowl, controller. This idea works for learning vocabulary words in other languages as well as English. It is much easier for them to remember one picture with many parts than many separate pictures. Matthias's art teacher said that her memory is like a computer screen. She needs to find the correct picture or icon to find what she is trying to remember. Stories. Stories play a significant part in teaching people who think like this. Facts have emotional visual context when they are presented in a story form. Facts by themselves often can be remembered in a short-term memory, but their long-term memory doesn't seem to have any interest in retaining that information. Ruby said she got through history and science because she has a good short-term memory. She doesn't remember anything from those classes. Matthias's art teacher said that she was so glad to get out of high school and get away from those fact classes. However, Matthias remembers all kinds of facts about people in sports because he knows the players' stories. Shirley described getting through history by choosing to relate to the historical figures by finding out their stories. This has been a common theme with the people I have talked to. They are very sensitive to their physical, spiritual, and emotional environment. Matthias demonstrated this to me with his awareness of noise, including the sirens down the street, the dogs barking, any movement around the house that easily distracts him from getting homework done. Sherry says that has been verified by others that they must push those things to the peripheral part of their minds while choosing to focus on what is in front of them. This is why a powwow is slow moving, so they can take it all in, as well as thinking through the associations, the feel of the music, the dancing, connect to the physical and emotional movement while praying. There is often a spiritual connection with the audience as well. Sherry said that she and a friend were able to get close to a doe in the wild because of this awareness. The doe just looked at them like she was wondering how they got that close, but she wasn't afraid. The doe knew she was safe. Ruby and Cindy are known for their ability to work with people in the workplace. They read people well and can help them work together. They often can read a room as well. Is there tension, fear, confusion, anger, or a mixture in the room? Is God manifesting his presence or demons? People with this gift often sense these things that the rest of us can't. However, some of them have figured out or have been taught what to do with that information and some have not. I want you to know that they're not crazy, but they are sensitive to the supernatural world around them. They just are. Whether you are or not is not the issue. That's who they are. Accepting for who they are and how what they experience is part of getting to know them. The creative slide is next. This is Matthias's work. You'll also see it on the back up here. This is made by Tracy Birdtail. Isn't it gorgeous? This is Ruth's drawing for me for my coaching business. Ruth took 3 weeks to figure out exactly what she wanted to draw. She couldn't see it in her mind fully. Yeah, it was coming, but it's like, okay, what does this look like? How does it come together? And so she ended up doing like 6 or 7 drawings of this before she was content with what she gave me. We looked at Tracy Birdtail's piece of beading. Ruby's family actually gets together to do beading. Debbie does paintings. Mary sews and does beadwork. Matthias creates posters, draws, and paints. The list could go on and on. Celebrating their creativity can be wonderful. However, in the classroom, it's another story. There's another part of being big picture creative that I ran into while doing these slides with my son. When I talked to Ruth about his struggle to draw an analogy or put water with a plateau, she understood completely. When figuring out what she wants to paint, there are so many ideas that are flowing through her mind that it can become quite stressful. And it doesn't help that she and others like her can be perfectionists. It also adds another level of stress when they are trying to do a piece of art for someone else. It took Ruth. However, there's another part of figuring out what to create that I hadn't thought of. When talking to Cindy, she said when working with others, Matthias needed to ask questions about the concept of the piece so there were fewer pictures in his mind to pick from. Matthias described what was going on through his brain as a pool of apples that he had to pick the best one from. So anything that would take it from a pool of apples down to a pail of apples would help. Once he understood that, then the next question is, can he have creative license, or did the piece have specific requirements? Ruth is in her 80s, and when I told her about the questions, her reply was, I wouldn't know the questions to ask. Matthias runs the same problem. He knows he needs more information, but what to ask is a mystery that takes choice and work to figure out. And another thing, I wanted to know more about what was happening inside Matthias's mind so I could work more effectively with him. To help myself understand, I remembered a conversation we had with a retired principal. He asked Matthias if he has a scroll that moves in his mind while reading. Well, Matthias immediately responded, yes. Sherry says hers is more like a Rolodex. The thing is, it's a series of pictures, scenes, analogies, and associations, many which include words. I've learned that when they say, I don't know, that's what they mean. Sometimes the scroll has stopped moving. If I wait, it will start moving again as they are thinking through the question. Other times they are stuck and we go on a rabbit trail and then they come back to the topic and go forward. Other times we have stopped and taken time to pray, and then Holy Spirit shows them something that gets the scroll moving again. At other times they need more visual information in order to sort out and decide what to do or create. For me, that insight changes the expectations I have when Matthias is approaching a new project or even a conversation. Now back to our story. It worked, and we're starting to really go forward in his life. He's still dealing with anxiety. Can he do it well? Because which apple do you pick? In trying to do things quickly, most of us can flow pretty quickly. He doesn't. He has to have time to think things through to make those connections. Now, going back to why I am doing this podcast, I have been asked by those that have helped me understand my son to be their voice. I am writing a book. However, for people that think like my son, I am writing a book. However, for people that think like my son, they're probably not going to read the book. And so a podcast made much more sense because they're seeing pictures, they're hearing its story. And that's why we want to make these story about the person. I always let them be who they are because they are spiritual. They come with who they are, and that comes out in the podcast. It wasn't intended to be Christian, and yet that's the ladies right now that I am interviewing. Eventually, I'd like to have anybody from any other religion come on. Just tell us your story and how you think. I hope that kind of gives you the background, that gives you an understanding of where we are and why this is so important to me and important to my ladies, because this is just a very different way of thinking. But isn't it wonderful? Isn't it incredible? And I'm finding that many in our creative community think like Matthias does, with the same process issue of just not being sequential. That's very, very common. So thank you, everyone, and God bless.